those grapes.
$135
More.
or 82.
Is that good?
More.
Yeah.
Huh?
Right there.
He came in and they took it while I was in the hospital, and the lady about put him in the next bed. It was so high.
It wasn't on.
Yes, it was.
The only reason she said
remember
that, I convinced her. You know what it was? Was 160 over 90, which is borderline high.
But then they took, somebody else took it.
But the reason I told them I had high blood pressure, 250 over 120. See, I told her that.
That's going to get you in trouble.
And that was what
Freaked her out, huh?
freaked her out. She says, "Well, what are you taking to bring it down?" Because it wasn't that high.
Tell her stress pills.
No, what she took it at 160 over 90 is borderline. It's not classed as high; it's borderline. And Paul says, "Well, that's high, so let's take it." So she took it. It was 140 over 83, which is.
Karen made that. What is it?
Karen, where did you find this little house?
I did the prints at a place down here in American Fork, and I also saw them over in Springville, and he
Yeah,
did
we
the
do
whole
'em.
thing,
We do
mounted and
this one.
framed, and the print, and then you just color them in with pencils, prism pencils, prism,
And then put the
and
names
then
in.
put the names in.
Yeah,
Well,
lady,
I
lady
thought it
by
was
the name
amazing.
of Bev Glazer.
I have one at home with
Just
Brad
warm
and
it
I,
when you
both
get
of
ready
us.
to go there.
We've been running here
We
for
copied
about
all
2 or
those.
3 minutes. We're all right.
You have?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, rewind.
We'll just cut it out.
Talk into that, Brad, have an introduction, did you?
No, it's.
No?
I'm just the
Dawn will do the
audio.
honors.
I'm just the
I
audio
think
man
Don's
here.
getting ready to make the
We will make a
introduction.
formal introduction
Okay.
here.
Go ahead. Make a formal introduction, Don.
Are you ready?
I am past
We
ready.
have called this family night on the evening of July 15th, Monday evening, 1991, for the purpose of recording a personal history of our father, Calvin C. Powell. This time we will turn the time over to him for his report to his family.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. In all of the research I've been able to do, you're supposed to introduce yourself by saying, "I was born on April 23rd, 1922, which happened to be Easter Sunday morning." That is the latest I have ever heard tell of Easter coming in the year. But my sister Esther always reminded me that I was born on Easter morning, and she ran all the way to church to tell all of her friends that she had a new little brother on Easter morning. I was born in the house that my father had built in, 1914, I think. But he was a carpenter, school teacher, carpenter spare time. He'd worked in Ogden as a carpenter, and he learned the trade and built his own house in Colville. Now this house was a modern house for the time. We even had a central heating system, a furnace. Most of the homes built in that time had stoves, had a stove in each room, and they were coal-burning stoves, and that was how the houses were heated. But we had a central furnace, one furnace, right in the middle of the house, and went down. Now, Don remembers the floor furnaces we had in the first house that we had in Salt Lake. And this was a little bit similar to it, except it was a coal-fired furnace instead of a gas-fired furnace. And we had some warm times on that furnace, but it was the most modern furnace of its day. Now, Dr. French delivered this 10-pound baby
You were 10 pounds?
Mother says I was one of her smaller babies. Most of her babies were 12.
Oh my gosh.
I
The
think
scales weren't accurate.
I think the way they weighed them that time was the doctor picked up the baby and said, "A nice baby. He'll weigh 10 or he'll weigh 12 pounds." But at any rate, I was calibrated at 10 pounds. The smallest babies my mother had were the twins that weighed about 7 pounds each. Now, I was given the name of Calvin, and I'll never remember quite why, but I think Calvin Coolidge, the president, was vice president at this time. And I'll never understand why they named me Calvin, because my dad was staunch Democrat, and Calvin Coolidge was a Republican. But anyway, I asked Mother why she named me Calvin, and she says, "I like the name." And I guess that's why most of us get our names that we did, is because our parents liked the name. My earliest recollection was probably my 3rd birthday. I remember going into Mother's bed and climbing up on the bed, and she pulled me up beside her, and she says, "Happy birthday, son. Do you know you're 3 years old today?" She held up her 3 fingers, I remember, and said, "You're 3 years old today."
Yeah.
I think probably about the time I was 4 years old, or probably 26 or maybe 27, my dad decided, that's 1927, my dad decided he wanted to go back to the farm. And he bought the farm in Upton that year. And I remember we would go to Upton in the summer to live, to farm, and then live in Colville in the winter. Now, up in Upton, you must understand that we had dirt roads, and they weren't even gravel, they were just dirt. So in the spring, the roads up there were almost impassable. But at any rate, in 1928, when I was 6 years old, my brother Emerson and I and my dad stayed in Upton all winter long. Mother lived in Colville with the older children and the younger ones, and the older ones went to high school at Colville. Em and I went to school in Upton, and Dad taught school in Upton, and we tended the farm, and we milked the cows, and we fed the chickens, and we fed the cattle, and harnessed the horses, and all of the things that you do on a farm. One of my earliest recollections was the old 24 Model T Fords that my dad bought. And I used to love to ride on the hood of that Ford. They'd set me up there like I was on a horse, and I'd ride up the lane about 100 yards up to the road when Dad and Mom were going out somewhere. And it was great sport. They had a big, nice radiator cap up there that I could hang on to like a saddle horn. And it was great sport. When they were coming home, they'd never let me ride up there because the car was too hot. I'd been driving and it was too warm then. But going out, the car was cold and it was a nice ride. My dad ran the school bus. He taught school in Upton, and there was probably 3 or 4 children in each of the grades in school. There was 2 or 3 in the first grade and 3 or 4 in the second, and anyway, they had 2 teachers and taught 8 grades. My dad was the teacher of the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. My first grade teacher was was Rowena Gale. She taught there again in the second, when I was in the second grade. Leah Wright was my third grade teacher, and Claire Howard was my fourth grade teacher. Now when it came time for the fifth grade to come along, Dad decided that I was big enough then to ride the school bus to Colville. Must tell you that they had, the school district had bought what they called the cracker box. And it was just a box built on the back of a Chevy chassis. And they jammed 18 students in there. And they went up, clear up 18 miles up Chalk Creek, and toted the high school kids to Colville to go to school. And inasmuch as there was room on the school bus, they put me on there, well, and Sanders and Nancy, my younger brother and sister, and they went to Colville too, and were all taught that year in Colville. My fifth grade teacher was Gladys Willoughby, and I met a lot of new kids in Colville. My friends in Upton were Roy Powell and Edison Boyer and June Staley were all in my same class. Now June was a little bit younger than the rest of us, so she was held back one year and put more in her age group. But that was the four of us who were that age who started the classes, and my age, and we went through school together, really, clear through high school.
So how big were your classes in Colville when you went down there?
There was about 25 students in the fifth grade, and they had one class for each grade, and they ranged from 21 to 26 students in each of the grades. And then in the sixth grade, my dad said, I have taught all of my students, I've taught all of my kids at least 1 year. So this is the year, this is the last year that I'll have a chance to teach Calvin. So I went back to Upton. Upton School had been at this time revised so that there were only one classroom and 6 grades. And my dad taught in that school that year. One classroom, 6 grades, and Dad was the school teacher.
Was that the white little school that we would go to at our Powell reunions up
That's
at
the
Flat
white
Rock?
little school that we used to go to in Upton, yes. It became, when they finally abandoned that school, they gave it to the church, to the ward. And the ward took it over as a recreation center. And they put a basketball up in the classroom, they moved the desks out, and they played basketball, and they roller skated and jumped the rope, and it was a playtime for the Mutual and where they went. Now it has all been, of course, since then torn down, and a new chapel is built where the old school stood. Early memories of my activities on the farm include, well, let's see. My dad bought the farm in Upton. At the time he did, his brothers, Ed and Charles, Edward and Charles, also owned property in Upton. And when Dad moved up there, he needed a team of horses. Uncle Charles sold him a team of horses. And they were Bolly and Bird was their names. Now Bolly was a sorrel horse that had a white strip down his nose. And that was why they called him Bolly. That was where he got his name. Bird was a mare, and she was a brown horse with a little white a design in her forehead that could look like a bird in flight, and so she was called Bird. Now Bolly was according to my Uncle Charles, was a wild horse, but Dad tamed him and put me on him and let me ride him. I remember we had the big cedar hill up to the north of the farm there, and Lamar and Walt, being older, went up and cut cedar posts. And it was my job to ride old Bolly up on the hill with a harness on, and I held on to the hames. It was like two horns of a saddle. And I'd hold on to the hames, and we'd go up on the hill, and Lamar and Walt would hitch the posts that they had cut. And they'd hitch up 5 or 6 of them in a bundle and tie them to the horse, and I would tow them down to the farm, down to the ranch to Dad, and he would unhook them and send me back for another load. I remember one time, it was a hot summer day, and so they sent a water bag full of water up on the hill for the boys. And this Lamar, he was my oldest brother. He was so thirsty, he just took that whole gallon water bag and emptied it and drank it, which was the wrong thing to do, because in about a half a minute it came right back up. And there was Walt and I, thirsty as could be, and all the water Lamar had drunk, emptied the bag of water, and then he didn't even keep it down. It made
Not
us
too good.
a little bit upset. Well, one day when I was riding Bolly down, towing these horses, here came Uncle Charles and Aunt Mary. And I never saw at this time, it seemed to me like they just about hit high C. You are letting that little kid ride that big wild horse? Dad had tamed him, but Uncle Charles didn't. I was riding him. It was a great experience. I loved that. Well, in 1930, I turned 8 years old. And, of course, that was the time for baptism. And I was trying to tease my sister Esther, was a great one for wanting to get things done and done right. So, now Calvin, you're going to be baptized, aren't you? And, no, I'm not going to be baptized. I don't want to be baptized. You mean you want to take me down in that river and dunk me and hold me under the water? And I was teasing, of course, and then when I says, all right, I'll be baptized. And then my dad says, but why? You don't want to be baptized. And so I got teased back because of that. But I was baptized. The ward held a outing up in Joe Boyer's field. And they made a party of it. And it was a baptism party. And Roy and I, and I think there was a new kid on the block. And I think it was Bob Saxon. And the 3 of us were baptized in the river that day. They just found a little hole down there. And Vern Boyer, and he was dressed in white, and we were all dressed in white. And we went down to the river, and we were baptized in the river. And Vern
Is this
Boyer
Chalk Creek?
did it in Chalk Creek. And then the next day was Sunday, and I was confirmed in sacrament meeting by my father.
Why didn't your father baptize you?
I don't know, but Vern baptized all 3 of us.
That's just the way they did it.
It was just the way they did it.
Interesting.
So from then on, we had school at the school there, and we had school plays, and everybody in school had a part in the play. And I like to sing, and so I got a little singing part in a play. I can't remember what it was, but Merla Jacobson was the little girl that took the other part, and we had a Christmas play. Was it I'm not sure, it wasn't Christmas. But there was a little play that we produced, and we put it on in the dance hall, which was a hall that was just about a half a mile below the ranch where we lived. And it was, they had a stage in there, and we put chairs and benches in, really. And I remember taking apart the little song that we sang, and I sang a love song to Merla, and you know, like a fourth grade student would. And she sat there very shy, and she said, "Can't you see I'm shy? Oh yes, very shy. Oh yes, very shy indeed." And then I would turn and walk away, and she'd say, "Oh stay, I pray, I don't say nay, but I'm very shy." And then I came back and I'd say, "I will protect you from all kinds of harm, feed you with nectar and shelter you warm. Whate'er the weather, let it go by. We'll hold together, you and I." And then she sang again, "Can't you see I'm shy? Oh yes, very shy. Oh yes, very shy indeed." But that was the plays that I participated in the fourth grade. And we always had a road show in the Mutual in Upton. Now, Upton at this time was a town of about 100 people, and we were scattered for 10 miles long. But the church was the center of our activities, and we loved it. After the 6th grade, in the 7th grade, we joined junior high school, and we went to Colville, North Summit, to junior high school. And of course, all of the people in the north end of Summit County went to North Summit High School. And there was about 150 students in the junior high school and 150 students in the senior high school. And I think the most memorable thing of my whole high school career, at this time, a little sidelight, at this time in my life, it was a requirement that every senior had to give a senior speech. They had to develop themselves a talk, 15 minutes long, and present it before an assembly, before the entire student body. Every senior that graduated, until my class came along. And then they said, if you participate in a play or a production, we will count that as the senior speech. So I tried out for a part in the school play. And the school play we put on that year was Little Women. And I got the part of Father Marsh. March, yeah. And so I was Father March in Little Women. And I think they still study Little Women, do they not?
Yeah. It's a classic book. Yep.
But it was great. I quite enjoyed it. Roy was one of the other major characters, and he did a good job too. But we enjoyed our high school. Upon graduation from high school, I went to school at Utah State University, and I put in 1 year up there. Took a basic course just in basic education, didn't major in anything. Thought I wanted to go out in mathematics or something, but because I was good in mathematics. I understood math real well. Sidelight. In high school, we had to take, in the 9th grade we took algebra, 10th grade we took geometry, 11th grade we took physics, 12th grade we took chemistry. I took an extra class in business math in my senior year. And C.B. Copley was the math teacher, was the science teacher, math teacher. And he said, he told us, now in this business math, he says, anybody, in this math class, advanced math, he says, anybody who wants to get out of taking all these tests
Go ahead, Dick.
can take this test, and if you pass this test, you won't have to have a, you won't have to take a math test. So I took the test, and I passed it, and immediately forgot that I'd passed it. And so I just went right along with the math test, you know, and I was doing well in all of the classes that, in all of the classes that we had. I took the, I just stayed right with the class, and I answered all of the questions and all of the tests and everything, and it was easy for me. I quite enjoyed it. And then one day, about the end of the first semester, I come along this test that he had given me at the first of the year. And I went up and I says, "Hey, I took this test 3 months ago." He says, "Yeah." I says, "Well, I passed it." "Yeah." I says, "Well, I didn't need to do all this work." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, why didn't you let me?" He says, "Why should I stop you? You wanted to do it."
So if you would have remembered that or figured that, could you have gone on to the next class?
Yes. And at that point, he assigned me a business class. And he taught me to figure interest rates. And I got to figure stocks and bonds and interest on money and all of this, well, they called it business math.
Right.
And I drew straight A's in his math classes. So when I got to college, I thought, well, I'll take a general course and get into the math classes. And well, you kids that have been to college, you know that they try to wash you out the first year.
Right.
And they almost did me. Well, they did wash me out. I had some other reasons. Dad couldn't help me with school, and I had to save my own money to pay my own way to college. And I decided, heck with it, I'll just go to work. Well, that was the year that I took this fall quarter off in 1941. See, I went first year at Utah State from 1940 to 1941. And then in the fall of 41, I stayed out and went to work. And I found a good job because Uncle Sam was getting ready to
Go to work.
fight a war.
Yep.
And I got a good job making ammunition boxes. And,
That Hill Air Force, or where did you make them?
pardon?
Where'd they make them?
Well, we started out in Ogden, in the Marion Wilkins wool storehouse. They had a big warehouse there, and we just took over the warehouse and made these ammunition boxes. And you've seen some of them.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a couple of them that I've had all these years that I kept. but they made them for 37 millimeter anti-aircraft ammunition.
Hmm.
And they were a shell about 1.25 inches in diameter and about 8 inches long.
Yeah.
And anyway, we ran out of the contract and I went home.
What were
And-
wages paid back then?
Pardon?
You said you had a
I-
good job. What kind of money did you make?
75 cents an hour. I had been working the year before up on, well, I didn't tell you this, but during the 3 summers when I was 16, 17, and 18 years old, I went to work up on Charlie Meyer's ranch, driving a team, bucking hay, stacking hay, cutting it, mowing it. First year I worked on a sulky rake, the next year I worked on a buck rake, the next year I worked on a mowing machine. And I got $1 a day and my board and room.
Hmm.
And it was a 10-hour day.
Jeez.
And that was about as much as you could make. And then
So 75 cents an hour was a huge increase, wasn't it?
after I graduated from college, after I graduated from high school, that summer, Dad says, we are going to build a reservoir up in the mountains, and I want you to go. We have to pay the going rate, which is 43 cents an hour. But up there, we had to furnish our own lodging and our own grub. So the lodging was a tent. We went up the tops of the mountains, we pitched a tent, we took a bunch of straw and made a bed on the straw. And we gathered rocks out of the dam for 43 cents an hour. And that was the best money I'd ever dreamed of making. That winter, the gas line went through. No, it was the winter before that. I beg your pardon, the winter before that. That was in 1939. Mountain Fuel Supply Company ran a line, the second line, down through Upton, run it to Salt Lake City so that we could have natural gas in Salt Lake. And Walt and John and Em and I all got on. And I worked there 4 days. And I think we were making 75 cents an hour working on the gas line.
Working for Mountain Fuel.
No, S.D. Beckel Company.
Contractor for Mountain
Contractor
Fuel.
for Mountain Fuel. And we were chopping barrels of tar. And John and I went out and chopped barrels of tar. The tar came in 50-gallon drums. And it was our job to open these drums and chop this tar up into chunks about big enough that a man could pick. They would weigh about 25 pounds and put into a tar pot. You've seen the tar pots that they melt tar in to put hot roofs on. And that was about what they had. And they'd put these tar pots and they'd melt the tar and then they'd pour it on top of the pipe. And they had a granny rag underneath, and 2 men would run a granny rag under the pipe to get the tar all around the pipe. And then they had a little thing that they wrapped the pipe with tar paper. They'd wrap it this way, and then they'd wrap it that way. They'd tar it again and wrap it that way to keep it from rusting. Quite a contrast. I was up in Colville this last week. They're running a new gas line down through there. Now, it's a 36-inch gas line. It comes in pieces 80 feet long, and they just put it in, and it's already insulated against dirt. There's a new gas line from Wyoming to California,
Wow.
and you've read about it coming down through Bountiful. You've heard about the conflicts they've had out in Bountiful. But I couldn't help but think the difference, how much faster these guys go now than we did then.
Oh, yeah.
And of course then we had the most modern equipment to put it in. But
Talk about wages. I'm curious. You made 75 cents an hour. What would that be equivalent to today?
$16 an hour.
You could buy that much with
Mhm.
75 cents.
Wow. Amazing.
Amazing.
So Anyway, well, you couldn't buy that much, Brad, because there wasn't that many goods to buy.
Mhm.
We didn't have the stuff to buy that you do today.
Just wasn't available
It
for
just
you.
wasn't available. It just hadn't been thought about, let alone manufactured. So anyway, I worked for Charlie Myers up on the ranch on the Upper Bear River for $1 a day. And I made $25 in 25 days.
Hmm.
And there was no place to spend it. First year I went to college at Utah State. $326 for a year in college. Paid rent on the room, paid for groceries, paid for tuition and books, paid for entertainment for a year.
Now that'll buy you about 3 credit hours at the University of Utah.
If you're lucky.
Without any
Without
amenities, without
any
books,
amenities.
nothing.
Right.
That just buys the
The
school.
3 hours. It's about what it is.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Tuition for the year was $30 for the first quarter, and that included your yearbook.
Hmm.
First quarter, first.
First quarter was $30.
Um,
Second quarter was $20. The third quarter was $18. If you went 3 quarters in a year.
How would it be?
Unbelievable.
I mean, this gives you an idea as to how things have changed to what
Yeah.
they are now. Anyway, on December 7th, I was at home. I had left my job in the box factory in Ogden, and I was at home. We went to church in Upton, and the scenario of church was 10 o'clock was Sunday school, and since everybody had to come so far, we had all of our meetings on Sunday. Sunday school was from 10 till 12. Priesthood meeting ran from, and Relief Society ran from 12 till 12:30.
Half hour, huh?
And sacrament meeting ran from 12:30 till 2:30,
2 hours.
2 hours. Roy cut out from priesthood meeting for some reason, I don't remember why. Went out and turned the radio on, listened to radio in his dad's car. His dad had a brand new 1940 model Chevy, and he just loved that car, you know. And he came in and talked to his dad and didn't say anything. And so at the start of sacrament meeting, his dad was the bishop. Wilbur Powell was the bishop.
Hmm.
Wilbur and my dad were first cousins. And I remember the bishop got up and he said, "My son just heard over the radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed."
Hmm.
And of course this electrified everybody. And he went on, he says, "I'm sure that this means war and we're really going to have a bad time, you know." So what to do? Should we go down and enlist and declare we're gung-ho to go fight, or shall we wait? And I determined when they want me, they can draft me. That was my attitude. I'm not going to go. Now, John, they had had the draft before. My older brother, John, had been drafted before that. And the draft was for 12 months. You come and serve your country for 12 months, then you can go home. So John enlisted when he was drafted. They gave him the option of enlisting for 3 years in the Air Force, and he did. And he says, "Cal," he says, "enlist in the Air Force. Don't wait for them to draft you." He says, "If they draft you, they'll put you in the infantry. You'll be toting a rifle in the mud. If you enlist, you can get in the Air Force, and you can be, I says, yeah, but I don't wanna ride
Drop
on
out of the
a
sky.
plane. He says, I don't wanna get shot down over something in the can. He says, you don't have to. He says, they've got to have maintenance man on the airplanes. He says, you can become a prop specialist and just work on the props of the airplanes. He says, those airplanes that come home from combat, they'll come back shot up and the props crooked. He says, somebody's got to straighten them out. He says, he says, you're smart. He says, you can learn how to do that. I was smart, all right. I says, when they want me, they can draft me. And I kept hoping that the war would be over before they got down to drafting me. So at any rate, I went back to Ogden, and they got a new contract for after we declared war on Germany and Japan. I got my company, the company that I was with, got a new contract to supply more ammunition boxes, and I went back to work for them. And as I worked for them, pretty quick the government decided, we need warehouse space. You guys are just producing, get out of here, we want your warehouse. So we were supplying ammunition boxes to the Ogden Arsenal. And this was before Hill Field was designated as a place, training spot. But we did have the Ogden Arsenal there, and they were providing ammunition for the government. So my company, the American Box Company, went to Bountiful. They found a warehouse in Bountiful, right on the old Bamberger Railroad tracks, and we set up business there. And I couldn't find a place to rent in Bountiful to live. So I went out and found a little 10-foot trailer, homemade trailer, paid $200 for it. Had a gasoline stove in it, and a bed, and that was about all. And I found a place to park it about a block away from where I worked, and I hooked up to the electricity, run a card over from the landlady's house, and I paid, I think I paid $6 a month for a place to park the trailer and for the electricity. And I had the gasoline stove so I could cook, and when it got cold I just turned the gasoline stove on and kept the place warm, used it for a heater, which wasn't
Pretty dangerous, huh?
I almost got asphyxiated there once that I know of. I think the stove ran out of gas was the only reason I didn't get asphyxiated at that time. But must have had another reason for me, because I've come so close to dying so many times that the good Lord must have something in store for me yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, we moved down there in the winter, early winter, yeah, it was long about January. And no, it was April, it was closer to April, it was spring. And of course we had Sundays off, and what do you do on Sunday? You're a stranger in town. You go to church. So I went to church there in the Bountiful First Ward, that old meeting house. And it was Fast Sunday. And I went in there, and all of a sudden I heard a noise, a rattling. And I turned around and I looked, and here came about 14 little kids in, being trailed by this teacher. They're blonde woman, lady. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, and she looked at me and she just looked at me. I didn't know what else to do, so I winked. And darned if that gal didn't wink right back at me. So after meeting, when I left the church house, here she was standing out on the steps. And she says, why don't you teach a Sunday school class?
Mm.
And I don't know, I've never been asked to teach a Sunday school class. I wouldn't know how to begin. And so we talked and walked. And I was trying to get a free meal. So I almost had to invite myself to her house for dinner.
Mhm.
But she finally came through and gave me the invitation, and I accepted it readily. She says, but you've got to understand, I have to do the cooking. And I said, well, that's all right. She says, I have to do my own cooking anyway, you know, if I go home. And so we went to her house, and we went in, and there was nobody there. I says, well, where's your mother? And she says, don't have a mother. Do you have a father? Yes, but father works such long hours, he's so tired, he's in the other room asleep.
Mm.
So, in a little while, we got dinner ready, and she set up a table for three of us, and then she went in and woke up father and says, dinner's ready, Daddy, come in now. And never forget, she had a pot roast.
Mm.
She had pot roast for dinner fixed, and it was good. It was real good. It was the best meal I've had for a month, I think. And let's see, time-wise, this happened on the 2nd day of August. On the 26th day of August, I gave her a ring.
That didn't take very long.
Well, when you know what you want, you kind of go after it. And we announced to her father that we wanted to be married a little later on. And he says, oh, you've got to wait till after the war is over. Cal's going to the army, and
Had you been drafted at that point?
no.
But he just
But
thought you would be.
Well, everybody was being drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took her and her father up to Upton to meet Dad and Mother. And it went over real well. Mother treated them real good. And they liked Brother Evans, and they liked Ann. And so we went back and told Dad that we had chosen January 12th to be married. Now you must remember, or you must understand, that Lamar, my older brother, was married on January 12th. And so for me, that was kind of the day that I had in mind that I wanted to be married, the same day that he was. Mother didn't like it because she says it's bad luck. Lamar died on the 7th of February, the same year. He didn't. But so Mother thought that this was a bad time to choose to be married.
Mm-hmm.
We decided that this was the way we wanted to go. Incidentally, I had been driving a 1928 Model A Ford. And it was a going little car. It was only 10, 11 years old, and it was still going good and stuff. But this little the woman I had asked to marry me, decided she wanted something better. And one of the neighbors had bought a 37 model Pontiac, a little business coupe. And he had, a business coupe was just the front seat and the rest of it was all trunk. But there was about, nearly 2 feet behind the seat in front of the window. And he had taken that much out of the trunk and put a little seat back there so that he made the, so 2 people could sit back there. A little cramped, a little crowded, but it could be done. Probably as much room as there is in the back of your
Oh, Mustang.
pickup truck.
Oh, the pickup, huh?
I mean, about that much room, and that kind of a seat. Just kind of little jump seats. No, there wasn't as much as in the Mustang.
Oh, boy.
So, we bought the little Pontiac. And that was a good little car. We drove that a long ways.
What'd you pay for it?
$350.
How old was it?
Well, it was a 37 model, and it was 1942.
5 years old.
Uh-huh. You could buy a brand new one for $1,000. So, anyway, I remember, side note, my dad paid $1,000, $1,008 for his 1940 model Chevy, brand new. And it was the deluxe, it was the special deluxe model. It was the nicest Chevy that they built that year. And I remember Dad saying, this is the first car I've ever paid $1,000 for. He paid $1,008 for that car.
Wow.
So, we had the little Pontiac, but we also had gas rationing. And I had saved my gas ration tickets, coupons. You had to have a coupon to buy a gallon of gas. And they'd give you 3 gallons of gas a week to drive. So anyway, we decided we couldn't take the car on a honeymoon. We wanted to go down to California because we heard California was the place to go on a honeymoon. Ann's brother Jim was in California, and so we went down to see him. What are you going to do with the car while you're gone, Cal? Well, would you look out for it? Would you watch it for us? Sure, you can park it here. Where are your gas tickets? Oh, they're in the glove compartment, but don't use them. Just leave it parked there. So we spent our honeymoon in California
How did you get there?
on the bus.
Oh.
And we took the bus down, we took the bus home. When we got back to Salt Lake, we met one of Ann's girlfriends on the street. And she says, I hear your father is going to get married. Oh, is that right? Who's he marrying? Oh, he's marrying Frida Edley.
Free that.
So, so we had to take the bus from Salt Lake out to Bountiful, and I wanted my car. I mean, I wanted my wheels. So we found it out in the back of Aunt Dorothy's lawn with 2 flat tires and an empty gas tank. And my gas ticket's all used up.
Oh my
Is
gosh.
it Jim that did that for you?
Yeah,
Ran the
Mark
wheels
Childs
off
did
of
that
it.
for me.
Oh my
Nice
gosh.
guy. But anyway, remembrances are gone.
Yeah.
So it was, I went back to work at the box factory, and we got home there about the 20th about the 20th of January. And can't remember now, but I didn't work for the box factory but about a week after that. Then I was out of a job, and I took a job down at Cudahy's, stacking frozen meats. Cudahy was the meat packing plant. And I worked there for about 3 weeks until I was drafted. On the way to work there one morning, I was a little bit late, and I was hurrying, and I got over too far on the left side of the highway, and I met a car coming the other way.
Ooh.
A guy that was deaf and dumb. He couldn't speak, he couldn't hear. And so the car was put in the shop, and the insurance company paid for most of the damages. I think we had a $50 deductible. We had to come up with $50. But when I was drafted and left for the Army, we didn't have the car. And your mother hadn't learned to drive yet. So we talked to Brother Beasley, and she could talk to him better than she could her own father.
Who was he?
Brother Beasley was a counselor in the bishopric at the time. He had Beasley Motor Company, sold new Fords in Bountiful. But he was a real good friend of Ann's. Ann loved his daughter. He had his little daughter, Janice, in her Sunday school class. Janice was our flower girl at our wedding. So we loved Brother Beasley. And he said he would help her get the car. And when I got located, he would teach her to drive, and she could bring the car down to us. And he was on the ration board. So when it came time to get the car, she just went down and got it. And the guy showed her how to push in the clutch and how to shift the gears, and says, "Go to it, babe."
Great
And she
driver,
drove it
isn't
home from Salt Lake to Bountiful.
Mm.
Our first apartment in Bountiful was a real nice one. We paid $35 a month for it. It was a three-room apartment, kitchen, living room, bedroom, sort of thing, just kind of a line. And we paid $35 a month, and everybody thought we were paying way too much for it. But I was working at the box factory when we got it, and I could afford it. But
Did you sell your trailer?
what did I do with the trailer? I did not sell the trailer. I gave it to I left it on the lot. My dad went down and got it and took it home, and I don't know what he did with it.
Mm.
I think he sold it or something.
But you and Mom didn't ever live in the trailer?
We never lived in the
Oh.
trailer. And then I was drafted. I went to the Army. I went to Texas. And I was worried about being in Texas. My brother Walt had been on a mission when I was drafted. And I suggested to Ann that Walt bring her down in the car, help her drive. And she got mad at him. And, well, Mother wouldn't let Walt come alone with Ann, which was good thinking. I wasn't smart enough to think about it at the time. but she came down with them. And
So Grandma and Walt and Aaron all came?
yes, in that little car, came to Texas. And then we had to pay the ticket, the bus fare for Mom and Walt, for Mother and Walt.
To go back.
Back to Utah. And that was kind of a hard pill to swallow too, because we were about broke. We had saved $1,000 when we were married. I had saved $1,000, and we had that much money in the bank. But the time we spent in the Army, we kept running short of money, and we wanted to keep that $1,000 in the bank. That was our nest egg. That was for when we got home and we could start something. So we kept riding home and asking for money, and the money kept coming from her dad. He had a good job. He was working up to Hillfield. And so we came home and we still had the bank book. Here was $1,000 in the book. And so after we got home, and after Don was born, we decided to buy a house. And we had $1,000 in the bank to put down on the house. And we went to the bank, and there was no money there. Her father knew the banker real well, and so every time we asked for money, he went to the banker and withdrew money from our account and sent it to us.
Mm.
And of course, it was a personal thing between Dad and the banker that this money came. So, he said,
Broke.
well, here we go again. So, we cried to J.G. Goulden, Ann's older brother, and he says, we'll sue the banker. He can't do that. He can't take that money out. We'll sue the banker. And we thought about it. We said, no, because he'll just sue Dad. Because he gave the money to Dad, and we got the money. It wasn't what we planned, but we did get all the money that we had. We didn't have to pay him back the money that we borrowed from him.
Hmm.
So anyway, we went to Texas, and then we went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I went to school at Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We took 30 hours a quarter at the University of Louisiana, which was just a double load. They were handing out engineering degrees in 18 months, in 6 quarters. Instead of 12 quarters, they were handing it out in 6 quarters. So anyway, at the end of 2 quarters, they said, oh, we don't need any more engineers. If any of you can qualify for, can pass this test, which was a medical exam. Actually, it was a cutaway picture of a face, you know, all the medical names for all the nerves and the muscles and the bones and the tissues in the side of the face. There was about 25 items there. And they gave you 30 minutes to study this, and then you had to turn the page over and write it in on the back side. And if you could pass that test, you could qualify to go to medical school. And of the 115,000 GIs that took that test, about 4,000 got into medical school. I wasn't one of them.
It's a funny test, isn't it? It's more memorization than anything
Well,
else.
if a person had a photographic memory, they could.
Mm-hmm.
I had 2 friends that passed the test. They were both Jewish kids from New York. One of them I roomed with, his name was Powell. I can't remember the other kid's name. But the Jewish kids, this Pope kid, he was brilliant. I mean, they both had IQs of 171 or 2. And in later life, in studying how the Jews taught their kids in the schools that they went through, you could understand why these kids were brilliant. I mean, they go to school, to public school, for 6 hours a day, and then they have 6 hours a day in private tutoring. And that's the way the Jewish kids are taught. And they are brilliant. So anyway, we washed out of medical school, washed out of the ASTP program, and went back to the infantry. And about that time I didn't care, because I had had a premonition that I was going overseas as an infantry soldier. And I knew that. And I've told the story to you before about when I was up on the front line. It was so familiar to me, the trees around the complete with a tent over the hill. I had been there before, I had seen it before. And I knew then that I would be wounded in the right shoulder. And here again was my big opportunity to lose my life. And yet the Lord saw fit to spare me. And if he hadn't have done, why,
We wouldn't be here.
there'd been none of you kids.
So what was Mom doing during this time?
Mom was called on a mission. When she was in Texas, and William L. Warner called her on a mission. He says, "We need you young ladies. What are you going to do?" She says, "Well, my dad has remarried. There's no use of me going home. I don't have a home to go to. I just as well stay here in Texas and go on a mission."
And where was that? What part of Texas?
Kilgore, and it was East Texas. She was in Kilgore, and I can't think of the other town. It was the 2 towns that she was in. They were real close together. And we knew missionaries from that area before. We had been in that area before I went overseas, and she knew that.
Did she go to Louisiana with you?
She went to Louisiana while I was in school there, and then we were sent from there back to Paris, Texas.
Oh.
Paris was where I received my infantry training. That was Camp Maxey. And that was North Texas. That was right up close to the Oklahoma border. But she went over to Kilgore's, the only name I can think of.
Oh, that's okay. What was the name of her mission? Texas
That was
mission?
Texas, Louisiana. So we had an arrangement with the mission president. William L. Warner was the mission president. We had an arrangement with him that when I returned from overseas, that she would be released from her mission. And so when I got back to the States, I called her and she applied for her release. She says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "We're going to Walla Walla, Washington." I said, "And I'll only be there for about 3 weeks. So why don't you just go home to the folks?" And
Had she received word that you had been injured?
oh yes,
How did she receive that? Is that through the...
through a telegram. She got a telegram that said, "We regret to inform you that your husband has been slightly wounded."
So she didn't know what extent you had been wounded then?
was slightly wounded, was what the, so when I wrote home, crazy me, I gave vivid details. And Dad says, boy, if that's slightly wounded, I don't know what seriously wounded would be.
Mm-hmm.
I says, well, maybe the loss of an arm or a leg.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah. So I met her in Ogden, and I rode the bus into Ogden, and as she saw me, bless her little heart, she fainted. And my dad picked her up. I was a waif. I could hardly carry myself. I'd been in the hospital for 3 months and was barely able to carry myself around. And my right arm was no good at all. And so anyway, my dad picked her up and carried her into the car, took her out to Stone's, Anna Stone's folks' house. It was John's
Why?
wife's folks. And we spent a couple hours there, and then we went home back to Upton.
How long was this after you were wounded? You
I
recovered
was
for a
wounded
while.
on
and-
December 18, and it was probably the 26th of March when I got my furlough. Got a 30-day furlough from the 26th of March to the 26th of April. Now, she drove the car back from Texas to Utah, and then we drove the car back from Utah up to Washington and went back to the hospital.
So were you getting medical care somewhere in the meantime?
Well,
Or were you just healing?
I was just healing. Now, what they had done, Debbie, they did initial surgery on me in the hospital.
That's in London?
No,
Online.
that was in Belgium.
Mm.
That was right up in the front line. They
So
did
like
the
a MASH
emergen-
hospital or something?
Yes, And that was the evacuation hospital, they called it.
Yeah.
Well, I was evacuated to the first evac hospital. They did a preliminary scan of me, put me back in the ambulance and sent me to the second evacuation hospital, where they did surgery. Now, this second evacuation hospital was more like a,
Just behind the lines a little.
well, it was more like a schoolhouse. It was probably a schoolhouse. And they had taken the wounded GIs and they had just laid us like cardwood across the floor there, just stacked us in there as deep as they could on the stretchers. And then they went through like they do in MASH, and they say, this one is first, and this one is second, and we can save these guys, and those guys over there, if they live till we get to them, they'll probably die before we get to them. These guys we can save, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if those guys, so they kind of calibrated you on to the extent of your wound and where you would come into surgery. I remember I got to this evacuation hospital about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't get operated on. They didn't do surgery till probably midnight. And then I was immediately evacuated to another hospital, which was a tent hospital where all evacuees had gone. They put me in a cast, and they said, where do you want your cast? And I says, oh, get it out of my way. You know, I mean, don't get it up here in my face. I mean, get it out here. So that was the way they put it in a cast, so I carried it out like this. So and then I was evacuated to a regular hospital in Paris,
Went to
France.
Paris? Oh
I
my
was in
gosh.
Paris, France. And I was in Paris for Christmas, 1944. And I told, when Dawn was born, I told one of the little nurses, I says, you know, last Christmas, I spent in Paris. And she says, "Oh, too bad you was married."
Oh.
I said, "That didn't make a bit of difference." "Mr. Powell, what kind of a man are you?" I said, "I wasn't going anywhere. I was flat on the back of a hospital bed."
Couldn't do anything if you wanted to.
How long were you there?
A week. And then I was evacuated to Southampton in England, to another hospital. I beg your pardon, that was Dorchester. And I stayed there until on the 2nd of February, the doctor came in and he says, "Let's see your wound." And he cut away the bandage and he cut away the plaster Paris. And he says, "It looks like you're healed." He says, "We're going to reclassify you to Z of I."
What does that
That
mean?
is Zone of the Interior. We're going to send you back to the United States. And I said, "Oh, great." He says, "But," he says, "you're too wide." He says, you're 20 inches wide and you can't be more than 17 to get onto these stretchers. So we got to take that cast off, move your arm in here so we can send you,
Get you home.
get you home." So I went in and the doc cut the cast off me. And I says, "Now let that arm down real slow." And he says, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Well, let's try and see." And he just let it down. I breathed kind of hard. I says, "Yeah, I got it down." He says, "Good." He says, "You're going home walking. We're not going to put a cast back on you."
Oh my gosh.
So I waited there till it was about the 2nd, it was the 26th of February before they got a ship to ship me home. And I came home on the same ship that I went over on, which was the SS Argentina, which was a converted luxury liner. And when we got to New York, we were given 2 free phone calls for 3 minutes each.
Mm.
So I spent one of them and called in, and I spent one of them and called the folks. And then I got a hold of another one. Somebody didn't have anybody to call, and he gave me his free phone call. So I called him back a couple days later. We talked for about 20 minutes, and I had to pay for we were given the first 3 minutes, but the rest of it we had to pay for. But the phone company was good. They didn't charge us very much. I think it only cost about $5 or $6 to talk for 30 minutes. And it was worth it. So then I learned that I was going to Walla Walla, Washington, and so that was where I told Ann to meet me.
But you had a layover in Ogden on your way
Nope.
up. So,
I went to Walla Walla, Washington, checked in there, got a 30-day furlough.
What's a furlough?
oh, I see.
Time off.
I see.
What do they
Okay.
call it? Leave in the
Leave
Navy.
now?
Mm-hmm.
A furlough is time off as leave. You get
Oh,
30
so you
days.
checked in and then came
Yeah.
to Ogden for 30 days. I see. Okay.
And then I went back to Washington, and they took me in. See, I had 2 scars about 4 or 5 inches in diameter, and the scar up on top of my shoulder, the scar tissue had grown right to the bone. And the doctors didn't like that, so they just went in with a little skinning knife and they skinned all that scar tissue out and pulled the scar together, pulled the flesh together, and sewed it so that I just had a little narrow scar. About 2 days after the surgery, they took me in to examine me, and this shoulder had all filled up with fluid, and I remember the doctor saying, "Too bad we can't keep that fluid in there."
Mm-hmm. Looks
Says,
good.
"But it'll
huh?
go out, and then you'll have a hole there." That's what's happened.
Mm.
Well, while we were stationed at Walla Walla, we while we were stationed at Walla Walla, we started our family. And so when I was discharged from the hospital on the 26th day of July. Then we took a 2-week drive, a 2-week tour before we came home. We went up through the Northwest, down through the Redwoods. And your mother was car sick. She had morning sickness. And I decided that we would take the shortest road from San Francisco east. And we looked at the map, and here's a road right here. And we got onto that road, and it was up and down and round and back and up and down and round and back. And if you can imagine what a poor little girl with morning sickness was like, she was so sick. And this was the day that VJ was declared. And we got a motel that night, and we hoped to get some rest, some sleep. Do you think those neighbors would let us sleep? They were setting off fireworks, screaming, hollering, and carrying on. The war is over, the war is over.
Pretty exciting.
So the next day we drove on home and got onto a better road. And it was pretty nice. And gas rationing was over. They stopped gas rationing at that time. I had saved enough stamps to have enough gas to get home. Actually, I had bought gas on the black market and bought the gas stamps
Mm-hmm.
so that I could have enough gas, and I had enough stamps to get home. And then we just threw them away. We didn't need them anymore. I'm a little bit sorry we didn't save them
For souvenirs.
for souvenirs. I mean,
Yeah.
That would have been interesting to see.
it would have been, but we didn't save them. I mean, we were just glad to have gas.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, we moved to Logan, set up camp in Logan, and that's where we found a doctor for your mother, for Dawn. Your mother got a little high blood pressure, and she got a little toxemia, and she was about 8 months pregnant, and blood pressure got a little high, and the doctor says, well, we better induce labor.
At 8 months.
8 months. And so we induced labor, and nothing happened except the blood pressure went down. So she laid there in the hospital for 2 more weeks before Don was born and came on his own.
Oh, who paid for that?
The government.
Huh.
That was
That's
nice.
nice.
And it was real expensive. I mean, like $10 a day for a private room.
Mm-hmm.
But the government paid for it because she had been to the government doctor before my discharge. And so the government took care of this for us, which we were deeply grateful. But when Don was born, he was 21 inches tall and weighed barely 5 pounds.
A long, skinny
He
kid.
was a Little skinny kid, I'll tell you. So we went to school there.
How did you decide to go back to school since you hated it before or didn't succeed very well?
Well, it wasn't that I hated it. It was that I didn't have the money.
Mm. So you couldn't study enough, huh?
I had to work to support myself in college, see. And I swore that I wouldn't go back to school that way. So when I got out of the Army, then I got on to the, it wasn't the GI Bill, I went back on the Public Law 16. The GI Bill was 346. Public Law was rehabilitation, which paid just a little more than the GI Bill did.
Public law what?
16.
Oh, public law 16.
And
That's for disabled guys.
yes, that's a rehabilitation. And I got just a little bit more benefits than the guys that went on 346. 346 was the GI Bill. So
So what they pay for? All of your college tuition and
yes,
books?
paid tuition, paid tuition and books, and gave me a salary, I think, of, with my disability compensation, was about $100 a month, which made it so that we could survive.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get rich, but we survived. I only had a 40% disability. Some of the guys who had 100% disability was getting, well, as it started out, 40% disability paid $40 a month. 100% disability paid $100 a month. But if you had 100% disability, there were other benefits. I mean, they paid you for your wife, they paid you for your children, and this and that thing. You had to have at least a 50% disability to get the other benefits, which I didn't have. I only had 40% disability. And that was my own fault. I was too anxious to get out of the Army. I could have had a bigger disability, I think. But, and I was told to go back and fight it. And I said, no way, I want to get out. One place I did benefit was in my GI insurance. They says, what are you going to do with your GI insurance? I says, cancel it. I says, I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with the Army. And so about 3 years later, I got a notice from the government that said, fill out this form if you want to continue insurance. And I just read it about half, threw it away, and a month later I got another one, so I filled it out about half and sent it in. And then I got a notice in the mail, and this was 3 years later, so I'd mellowed just a little bit. And I got a notice that said, Mr. Powell, if you want to keep your insurance, you better start making the premiums. I said, you mean I've had this insurance for 3 years and I haven't made any premiums? And they said, yes. When you became 100% disabled, the government started paying your own premiums. And I says, oh, well that's nice. So I started picking up the premiums. And then about 3 years after, the government decided that they had been charging too much for the insurance. So I got a rebate on all of these premiums that I had never paid.
Oh my God.
Which,
Boy, that had never happened today.
which I thought, well, blessed twice.
Yeah.
I mean, things are changing, things are picking up. So then well, back to school. I was too badly shot up too badly disabled to get a job, I felt. So I went on my rehabilitation. And I figured that I would never be able to use my arm real good. That old right arm was still pretty bad. I couldn't pick it up. I couldn't lift it. Well, I still can't.
Mhm.
So I decided to go into poultry husbandry and into farming. I quite like the chicken business. And I graduated with a master's, with a BS degree in poultry husbandry. And I had a major in back up. My bachelor's degree was in agriculture, with a major in poultry husbandry, and I had another major in agricultural economics, and I had 2 minors, and I forget what they were in, but they were all related. And
Poultry husbandry and what economics?
Agriculture.
economics. And then I had, it was animal husbandry was one of my
Minors.
minors. I had a minor in animal husbandry and a minor in, I think it was in horticulture. But they were all related, so I graduated from school. My brother Emerson had been working in California at a supply, at a defense plant, there we go. And he had saved his money, and he came back to Logan and went to school. And he graduated from Utah State the same year I did. And he graduated with a major in industrial arts and education. So he went to teaching school. That's what he spent his life doing, as a school teacher out in Twelve.
What'd you do in college to develop your arm?
I took swimming classes, mostly. And I got an A out of every swimming class I took. Because the professor, he thought I was doing good to get that old arm to move at all. And I worked with it. I worked with it every bit I could. And I tried to lift weights with it. And I'd do these other things. I was pretty careful what I did do, but I worked, you know, I figured swimming was the best thing I could do for it. And it worked out good. So anyway, I graduated from Utah State in 1947, and Debbie was born in August of 1947, 14th of August. We had moved out to a little farm. We wanted to get out of that darned apartment. We moved out on the farm, and the little house you were born in is no longer there. Where we lived when you were born. You were born in the Budge Hospital in Walton. Don was born in the Budge Hospital in Walton.
And the farm was,
Hmm?
where was the farm? That was in the old
About 6 miles
College
south of
Ward. Was that what it
College
was
Ward.
called?
And you were blessed in the building, the church house there in College Ward, which is now a tractor repair
I seen it.
building.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I decided to go to work as a hatchery specialist. Worked for Powell Hatchery. So I had been hired by Mr. Powell, and So I checked out of school. I decided I didn't want to go on. I had enough time to get a master's degree, but I was tired of school. So we checked out of school and went to Salt Lake and bought a home, went back to Logan to get our furniture to move in the home so we could start to work. Found a letter in the mailbox that says, "Sorry, Mr. Powell, we've changed our plans. We won't be putting on mine at this time."
After you had bought the home.
Right.
Mm.
It was at this time that I found out that we didn't have any money to buy a home with. So we borrowed some money from Sanders. He had his money saved. He was going on a mission. We borrowed some money from him. Told him, well, we'll pay you. Instead of you spending your money out of your bank to run the mission, we'll make the payments for you, so we'll support you on your mission. And then we borrowed some from Dad Evans and anybody else we could finagle into it. We borrowed about $1,700 to make a down payment on the house.
Is that the house on Judith Street, or was that the house on Downington?
That was the one on Downington. Well, the house on Judith Street, we bought 2 years later.
What was the address? What Downington Avenue?
Seems like it was 604, but that may not be right. My dad's house was 604 Browning,
Oh,
and we lived straight south of him, and it was right on. It was the first house, the second house from the corner there.
is that still there?
I think it's still there.
Hmm.
And we lived there until, well, just before Jerry was born.
So was that 1947 to 49?
Uh-huh. We sold that house in 1941, I guess.
Okay. What were you doing while you were there?
After I got that letter that I didn't have a job,
Mm-hmm.
I went home and we had, I think, $2.50 in money. And so I took your mother and I said, $2.50 isn't worth keeping. We went out to a movie and bought a hamburger. And we were stone broke.
I love it.
I looked in the newspaper and here was an ad that says carpenters wanted. And I had had just a little bit of experience pounding nails. And so I went up and carpenters were making $1.50 an hour at that time. And I went up and I says, "I'm a carpenter." And old Lou Bowers needed some help, so he says, "I'll put you on as a helper." He says, "I'll take it." He started me out at $1 an hour. And the first day, I think I hit that thumb 6 times, at least. For the first 2 years, not only did I not have a nail on that thumb, I kept it raw, which should discourage anybody from
Pounding nails.
pounding nails. But I had...
What condition was your arm in at that time?
Huh?
What condition was your right arm in at that time?
It was developing. I had worked it in swimming so that I could pound a nail with it. I could swing this way. See, if I kept my elbow close to my body, didn't move my shoulder too much, I could swing this way. See, my hammer out here. See, and I put that old thumb about every other time. But I finally started to grow a nail there, but I kept it black for a lot of years. But look at it, there's not a black spot on it.
Amazing. Time to get back to work.
And so I went to work for Lou Bowers and worked for him for 2 years, I think. And then I went to work for Bert and Tate. Bert Tate promised me we'd go into business together. But as it ended up,